Not everyone has welcomed the so-called DNA bill with open arms. The DA has cautiously welcomed the Criminal Law Forensic Procedures Amendment Bill that was passed in Parliament yesterday. But what does the introduction of this mean in practical terms? Independent forensic consultant Paul O'Sullivan joins us in studio. Good morning, Paul. Thanks very much for coming in. What will this new act change in the way a crime scene is investigated compared to the past?
It shouldn't. The crime scene should have already been investigated in a way that if there was DNA, it was recovered. But what will happen now as a result of this act is there'll be a lot more focus on recovering DNA. And we investigate some cases where the DNA is just ignored. For example, cigarette butts, but any form of body tissue really, a tissue that somebody has blown their nose with. It can provide damning evidence, and I think what's going to happen now is there's going to be a lot of training, because if you look at the bill, and I imagine it'll take some while to implement, there's quite a lot of training has to be done.
Well, we were looking at the cost of this. I mean, the estimated costs sitting at 1.2 billion rand. That isn't even an accurate figure yet. How massive an operation do you think it is going to be to introduce this?
No, it's a big operation, but I mean it's been done pretty much everywhere else in the world, and we have the benefit now, having introduced it late, we have the benefit of being able to learn from other people's mistakes. So, I mean, I've looked at the bill. I think it's reasonably well worded. And I think if it needs any fine-tuning after it's been put into action, they can fine-tune it. But the fact of the matter is that DNA is here to stay. It's relatively, well, the existence of DNA isn't new. It's been known since about 1868. But it's only started being used in forensics since the late 80s. And we are now going to see a proliferation of the use of DNA to the extent that this bill will result in conduct in the criminal justice system that becomes a criminal deterrent, in very much the same way as CCTV cameras are installed in a shopping mall or in a university or anywhere for that matter. People realize, well, hang on, I better be careful what I'm doing here because I'm being watched.
Who will be expected to give samples?
Well, in terms of the legislation, anybody that's been arrested and is on reasonable grounds thought to have committed a Schedule 1 offence, and there's a whole list of offences, such as theft, for example, or fraud, or, there's a whole list of offences.
Arrested but not charged.
Arrested but not charged. So, and the sample would not necessarily be given for the investigation of his own case. It works on the precept which has been used overseas, which is that criminals commit crime. Now, the people that go through their lives without ever having committed a crime are unlikely to come in touch with the criminal justice system unless they're a victim of crime. So what you need to do is you need to make sure that when criminals do come into the criminal justice system, that we check their data in the same way that we do with fingerprints at the moment. So when you get arrested now, they take your fingerprints on a form SA76 that's sent off to head office. That process is now all electronic. People used to sit with magnifying glasses. Now the same will happen with DNA. So I imagine, let's say it takes them a year to roll it out. In a year's time, if you get arrested for shoplifting, when you're taken in, they will take a swab from your mouth. It's called a buccal swab. Now, when that swab is taken, it's sent off to the forensic laboratory, and they will isolate what they call your DNA profile. Everybody has the same DNA except for about 0.01% of your DNA, the only exception being identical twins. So they'll get your DNA and they'll be able to put that into a database while you're being investigated for your various offences. And then if you're found not guilty, they have to dispose of that sample within 3 years.
That was one of the big human rights issues that was raised a few years ago. Have those privacy issues been ironed out in this format?
Well, it's got nothing to do with privacy because the DNA profiles are kept on a computer, and the computer will match to a serial number. So if you find that match, you then got to go through another step before you can identify who that person is. And bearing in mind, we've got to take samples from the victims of crime as well. We had the case, I think, 2 years ago, where an attorney was murdered, and he was put on top of a car, his own car, and then they burnt the car. And the only way we could find out that the body there was indeed him was to extract some DNA from the bones. And that was matched to a family member who were able to confirm that, that was actually him. So, it was used extensively in the World Trade Center bombing to identify the body parts that they found.
Paul, a final question to you, and this is not unheard of. Is this act open to abuse by corrupt police officers who might want to plant DNA at the scene, not unlike we've seen in the Ingelot's case, for example?
Yeah, it probably, the DNA on its own just places a person in a particular moment in time in a certain location. The DNA evidence on its own would not ever convict anybody. You need something more than that. So, we talk about motive and the means and so on and so forth. So, I suppose every system is open to abuse. And if it's open to abuse, I don't think it's that type of abuse I would be worried about. I would be worried about the abuse of DNA samples being taken and not finding their way to the laboratory, which is what's been happening quite a lot with the people that get caught drunk driving. Somebody deliberately tampers with their sample, and once that's happened, it can no longer be used. However, with DNA, even if it doesn't get to the laboratory, they can just come and get another sample. And one thing you can't do is you can't swap samples with somebody else. So yeah, there would be a few challenges, but I'm pretty sure we would be able to cope with it.
Paul O'Sullivan, thanks very much for your insight into that story.
News that moves. enca.com.